Hello and welcome to another episode of Lockdown Dads. I'm James Miller, editor of workingdads.co.uk and author of Dads Don't Babysit. In fact, I really should have put a copy of my book on here, shouldn't I? So I could plug it. I might do that in a minute while my fellow guests are talking. This is Lockdown Dads. We're here every week to talk about the experience of lockdown and what this weird year has been like for dads. And as ever, I am joined by
Ian Dinwoody. That's me. I am the founder of Inspiring Dads. I'm a coach. I'm also a hockey umpire, which we may or may not talk about today. And this week, we're really delighted to have someone with us who we've collaborated with before, but we've never actually had it on our show yet. And I think that's long overdue. Mr. Dan Reed, who is head of digital and platform delivery at Barclays, and also the founder of Career Dad. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It does feel like this is long over. No, I mean, it's probably a bit bad for me saying it feels long overdue, as in why have I waited so long for your call? But it does feel like it is long overdue, this conversation.
I haven't been on your podcast. Have you been on his podcast yet? Oh, well,
we talked about it.
Long overdue. I mean, it's kind of in your hands, Dan.
Works both ways.
Didn't know it was going to get personal. But okay.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
I like that.
So Dan, we start off every week in talking about how are you, and particularly, that can be a challenge at this time and over the summer and that sort of thing. So tell us how you're getting on.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll do the first off, the classic Carl Pilkington. I'm all right. All right. Yeah. All right. But no, it's hard, isn't it? You hear the roller coaster or the corona coaster or all these different phrases that for me kind of symbolize just the ups and downs. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday, saying that I used to say, oh, there are good days and there are bad days. And now I've kind of condensed that to there are good hours and bad hours. And, like, for example, this morning I was floating around. It was all like high fives and, hey, how is everyone? By lunchtime, I'm like stressed out, trying to make lunches, trying to make coffees for people. Another project's kicking off, and yeah, it's just hard. I think I'm thinking of it at a big macro level. I think I'm good, and I'm definitely better than I have been during lockdown. But yeah, I think there's still some little niggly things that could be better.
Sounds very, very relatable. I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How have you been this week, Ian?
Better than Donald Trump. Get that in early. I did some coaching. So outside, I did some umpire coaching at the weekend, which I really, really enjoyed. I was an umpire coach candidate, South Division 1 game, and I passed. I spotted all the things that my fellow umpire coach had spotted. And so I'm now allowed to go out and watch and help people to move to the next level on my own, so I can be unsupervised.
Amazing.
So that's nice, and it's something I want to do for a couple of years now. I've got the opportunity, and then I was going to umpire at the weekend. Did a bit too much exercise, hurt my foot swelled up, pulled off the game. So swings and roundabouts on that one. And yeah, the particular highlight this morning, going back to Dan, your point about good hours and bad hours. Morning was going along nicely. Email from school. So one of the members of staff has tested positive for COVID in my daughter's year 6. All of year 6 are home and start self-isolating from this afternoon. So to be honest, I could have gone and got my daughter at 1:00. However, both my wife and I are slightly busy, me with recording this, and she's got work to do as well. So we figured, that's something that can wait a couple of hours. It's not disastrous. So ups and downs. So my daughter starts 2 weeks of self-isolation as of when I go and get her.
Couldn't she just get the train home? Because here you go. You want to be satirical? Apparently, even if you've got a positive test now, you can just go and get on a train. I mean, that's.
I think everything's up for grabs.
I'm referring to the idiot MP. That is not allowed. If you've got a positive test, don't get on a train.
I think we're starting to. What's acceptable behaviour just seems to change all the time.
It's really funny because I've been speaking to people who go, oh, there's so many, rules for certain areas and I don't kind of get, and it's hard to keep up with. And my take on it is just do whatever you feel morally comfortable with, because that's what you're going to end up doing anyway.
Yeah.
So make it easy for yourself, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Mumsnet, where it's a "Am I being unreasonable?" post, and sometimes they post, and it's like, and then the first question is, do you actually want us to tell you this, or are you just looking for validation of your viewpoint?
Exactly.
Which I love those posts. I get the Daily Digest. So yeah. So that's so yeah, we're looking for I'm at homeschooling my daughter. Fortunately, she's academic, and she does what she's told as well, so that helps.
Brilliant.
But I'll do less work. I'll do less work in the next couple of weeks.
How's that making you feel? I mean, that is obviously very much, you know, in the post-traumatic world that we're living in, that is very much a reminder back to those early days when things were different, shall we say? Is there have you got a bit of post-traumatic? I'm not trivializing post-traumatic stress disorder, but I think certainly a lot of people are talking about, you know, a nationwide impact of PTSD to some extent. You know, do you sort of feel that with this sudden getting the message going, oh, here we go, we're going back to it?
Yeah, I think I went into kind of just solving things to start with. I wrote down a list of the 5 things that my daughter who we'd need to inform that she couldn't do things. So just kind of, archetypal, kind of very practical things. My wife's very concerned about the impact on learning and that side of things. I think it'll be okay, because I think I can, between the two of us, we'll fill in any gaps. And I can, you know, best will in the world, there aren't too many things I have to do in the next couple of weeks that I can't just put on pause for a bit and prioritize making sure that Freya's supported. But she's at the age, she's nearly 11. She's quite capable of working on her own. So yeah, a bit of like heart beating, oh God. And then one of them can go to school, one of them can't. I'm not particularly worried about
work.
Okay, so the logic being, this is something that actually came up in the WhatsApp group this morning.
Okay.
Where do you draw the line? And I think the idea being that if you didn't draw the line somewhere, then everyone who had possibly met someone who could have been asymptomatic and passed it on. So my daughter could have it. She could already have passed it to me. I could already have passed it to whoever I saw yesterday. And at some stage, I guess you've got to draw a line and say, right, this is where we ring fence. This is the most likely outcome, is that some of the kids might have it, and therefore that's where we draw the line. And if they don't, otherwise the cascade gets crazy, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah.
That's when you get to lockdown, don't you?
Yeah.
Cancel the SAT. Cancel the SATs, eh? Sign the petition. Cancel the SATs. Kids are going to be off. Then they can't be sitting sat, can they? If they're not going to be in school for weeks at a time.
Yeah. How about you, James?
I got very political this week, haven't I? I've been slagging off Margaret Ferrier, saying signed petitions. I've been doing some more work around politics stuff again. I was back in Westminster for the first time in months this week, so that must be having an impact. I don't know, boring week this week, to be honest. I think, I say last week, all the uncertainty was a bit more stable this week, I would suggest. Like Dan said, I've been very busy, and I think I've been feeling something I haven't really felt a lot, but I've heard a lot of people have, which is that switching off between work and home. I think because I've been I've been inundated in the sense that I've had too much work this week and I haven't been able to deal with it, and I've had to say, right, I can't, certain stuff just isn't going to get done. I think that I would have appreciated going somewhere and feeling inundated and then coming home and leaving the inundation behind. I think there's been a little bit of that this week, and I know from the Working Dads and Lockdown series that we've had on workingdads.co.uk, which Dan contributed to. A lot of people have said that switch from work to home, that they're not missing the commute, but they're missing that switch. So I sort of felt that more than I have previously. I think pretty decent week. I was, of course, last week I said I was going to do Biscuit Roulette of Death this week, but I got a golf weekend with my brother, and I don't want to do anything that might damage my health. So next week I might do Biscuit Roulette of Death.
Biscuit Roulette.
I haven't got the necessary biscuits in, so we might have something to look forward to next week. I mean, lots going on with the How Are You this week, eh? That was a roller coaster before we even start.
Yeah. Ask me next week. I'm sure you will.
Well, tell you what, depending on the outcome of this golf weekend, then I could be very good next week. I could be very bad. So let's move on to the path. That is the name of the next feature. It's called The Path. Dan's, we've got Dan here. We keep talking about our own issues.
Yeah.
Let's talk to Dan, eh?
It's fine.
Career dad. Tell us about Career Dad. Tell us how it came about. What was the trigger? What made you think I want to start doing something, and how did it become Career Dad?
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I'll try not to go as deep as an answer on the first part, but I think some context is useful. So my parents got divorced when I was quite young, and that I didn't realize at the time, but it had quite an impact on me. So growing up, when I knew that I wanted to have a family of my own, and I'm sure that everyone goes into marriages and relationships thinking this, but I was like, if I get married, that is it. There's no divorces. I want to have a family. We're going to stick together for the kids, all of that good stuff. Like, and when I say like from probably the age of 10, like had this is what I was going to do. And so, thankfully so far so good. I met my now wife at university. We've been together obviously for quite a long time, and it's all kind of working out. But where Career Dad really came from was at the start of my career. I wouldn't even really call it a career. I just flitted around between different jobs because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I was kind of happy working here for 3 months, working my shortest tenure is 4 days, which we can cover if need be. But I was quite happy to say this isn't for me and just move on. And it's when I joined Barclays in 2013, realized that this huge organization, when you compound it with Barclays, and you can get places if you're good at if you're technically switched on and you're good with people and you're willing to put in the work, which I was all of those three things, you can progress. And so I started getting promoted, which was fantastic. And I kind of had this light of, oh, maybe I could have a career. Maybe I'm not just a bit of a waster. That also, married up with when I had my son. And what I found is that I was getting promotions, working more in London, starting to do a little bit of travel, either around the UK or sometimes internationally. And I was loving it, but it was taking me away from family. And I just had this guilt of, I'm selfishly progressing my career, and I'm actually being an absent father, which is the one thing that I never wanted to be. Now, if you spoke to my wife, or, probably not my son because he would be too young, but she would say, this is all in my head, that I was always there. I was always pitching in. I was always there, but I just felt like I wasn't doing enough. So I guess this is where the guilt really started to kick in. And it got to the point where, if friends, I'm quite into my sports, I like snowboarding, like playing golf, like just getting involved with things. And if a friend was saying, hey, do you want to go snowboard? We've got a snow zone down the road. Do you want to go snowboarding after work? I would feel too guilty to even have that conversation with my wife because, that then puts added pressure on her. So where it really came to a head is when my daughter was born. So that was the summer of last year. And we had an unplanned home birth, which again is another story. And what happened is obviously everything just switched off, as you'd expect. But I was in the midst of some really cool projects, some really exciting things that were happening. And I wanted to keep a hand in what was going on. So whilst I was on paternity leave, I would send, I'd be walking around the house in circles, trying to rock a baby to sleep, as you do. And I'd also have my phone and say, hey, how did that presentation go? How did this go? And I was just met with people saying, you need to be supporting your wife. Work will be here when you get back. You need to learn to switch off and all of this stuff. And it came from a good place, but it just wasn't my narrative. I was thinking, but I'm capable of, doing both things. And so I just felt really conflicted by, wanting to pursue my career and to enjoy that, but also want to be an active father. I summarize it as, yes, I want to go to Germany for that meeting, but I want to do the school run. And to me, they're not binary. I should be able to do both. And so I just kept getting these words, career and dad, coming up in sentences when I talked about it. And I literally fused them together and put a video on LinkedIn and said, I'm thinking this thing, I don't know what it is, but I'm thinking career dad, does it resonate? And my inbox was just flooded from guys saying, I know you don't know what it is, but I know what it is, just from career dad. And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say there, because one of the one of your more recent blogs sort of speaks to what you've just spoken about there, speaks to what you've spoken about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the sense of, one, I'm interested that you did a job for 4 days, because that also speaks to, well, just because that speaks to this idea that what you said in your blog was that you basically do what you like.
Yeah.
Do what suits you. And that suggests that has been a long-standing mantra of yours if you've walked out of a job in 4 days. And frankly, as somebody who's done the job for like a couple of weeks, I'm all for, if you know it's not for you, then why hang around? Absolutely. I'm intrigued by that. Where did that come from? Where does that sort of self-confidence come from? You're talking about guilt and that sounds like a lack of self-confidence, and yet clearly you've got some iron core going through you that says this is who I am, this is what I like.
So this is it's a really interesting question. I'm really happy that you kind of picked up on that, because growing up, I had kind of a fake I had such low self-esteem that the way that I compensated for that was having an outrageously over the top facade of self-confidence. So, if you've seen some of the things that I've written about that are maybe more personal, you'll know, when I was at university, I weighed 24 stone. So I was quite a big guy, to say the least. And, without getting too vulgar, lads at university, students at university, you'd go out to a club, and sometimes I'd end up taking home, some of the most beautiful girls in that club just by being so over the top confident. And it was almost like, this guy can't be real. Like this has to be a joke. And I'd have friends say, like, how are you doing that? But it was all because I had such low self-esteem. And then apply that into the business world, starting work, I was consumed by external validation. I had no way of internally recognizing that I was doing a good job, which meant that when I had managers who, even if it was once every few months, would give me a metaphorical pat on the back and say, hey, great job on that, that'd spear me on for, another good few months. But when they didn't, I really worried about my own performance and was I doing well? And I think compound that with, so my dad was, he was one of those guys who got into one organization at an entry level and stayed there for 30 years and retired very senior with a good pension. And that was instilled as well. It's, work is something you're not meant to enjoy. And I had this thing that was, you can't leave a company before 2 years. You have to, even if on day one, 2 years. And, so the 4-day thing, I guess it just goes back to over time, through therapy, through reading, through podcasting, and kind of doing a bit of soul searching, have shifted that external validation to internal validation. Now, it's a journey. I'm not by any means 100% internal validation, but I'm definitely over the 50% mark. So when it comes to, I've been at this place for 4 days and I know it's not for me, why would I not leave if I know it's not for me? Well, because some of my friends or family might say, what are you doing? You can't hack it. Well, that's fine. They don't have to like it or know it. And I guess it's kind of building up that resilience over time, and then doing what I do now, realizing that it doesn't really matter. What's the point in doing something that you don't like, especially if you're doing it for what someone else may think?
I don't want to go, I'm not a therapist, but I'm going to try and pursue a thread,
Sure.
put a thread on that, just because, to tie that into parenthood, obviously, there's a lot of looking for external validation when you're a parent. There's a lot of being judged by other parents for, and let's face it, mothers get that a lot harder than fathers. There's no doubt about that. But I just wonder where parenthood fits into that journey, if you like, and particularly, what you would recommend to other dads from what you've learned that they should follow. Is it go and get some therapy, which is generally good advice, but is there other bits of tips? We're not onto the tips section yet, but
we're not onto the tips.
Other things for sure. Other lessons that you've learned from that journey, perhaps, that you would pass on.
Absolutely. So on the therapy piece, I think is really interesting. And I would just recommend anyone and everyone to have therapy, even if they don't think there's a need to. Because what other environment do you get someone who will just listen to whatever you have to say intently and offer some reflections? And they're also trained to do that. Like, yeah, even if you're just a little bit narcissistic or egotistical, go have some therapy. Someone's going to listen to your stories. And you might get something out of it. But that is, there's only a few situations that I will say for me have been life changing. One was working at a summer camp in the US, and that's another. I keep saying that's another story, but that was life changing. But so was therapy, because it really helped me understand that I wasn't the problem to the things I thought I might be the problem to. But I mean, really understand that, as opposed to just kind of say, no, I do get it. So that would be a recommendation. But the other thing, and you mentioned there, there's, I think especially when you're a first time parent and you're a first time parent of you've just had a baby, everyone has an opinion and advice for you, and that's great. But the one piece of advice that I would give, or that I do give, is just, if it works for you, screw everyone else. Because there are, so my son, he slept in our bed until he was, well, actually I think probably until our daughter was born. So he was 4.5, 5, and he slept in our bed. And I had, my parents, that's not normal. What, is he going to be at university before he? And I was just like, this literally doesn't impact you in any way. So I don't know why you have an opinion on it. But again, that's because I kind of have gone through this righteous, internal validation. But, when we had a newborn, there was lots of people wanting to give opinions on what we should be feeding, how we should be doing routines, how we should. And I just think if you've got something that works for you, and you being extended family unit, then just screw everyone else, because why does it matter? That's, I think, the best advice I could give.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, Dan, because does that feed into some of the conversations that you had around schooling? Because I know your son, it was quite an interesting, a lot of parents over the summer have been waiting with bated breath for their children to go back to school. And I'm obviously now facing my daughter being home from school for a couple of weeks. But I know you've talked about how you're homeschooling your son now. And I wondered how that all fitted together. I guess to a certain extent, what works for you is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And actually, because I looked behind me a few minutes ago, because it's a bit like The Ring. He's there, just that I was like, you can feel this presence, but he's gone again. So yeah, and that's it was a really tough decision, because, and again, I have to be kind of careful how I phrase this, because I realize that when I talk about the home birth, I phrase it in a similar way, and I don't want to ostracize or offend people. But I'm not a homeschooling parent. That's not a dream of mine. It's not something that I ever thought would be on our agenda. But you're right, it comes down to what works for us. And to provide some context, so I'm working, my wife's now finished paternity leave, so she's working. We have a 14-month-old daughter. Thankfully, we have my in-laws, so her parents, who live around the corner, who they provided childcare for our son when he was little, and they were happy to do the same for our daughter. Now, my father-in-law has been on the shielded list since COVID started. So we kind of had to make that decision of, even though it's incredibly unlikely, if my son goes to school, picks something up, comes back, gives it to the daughter, and she then gives it. And I'm talking very, very unlikely, but the result could be death. And I would just rather, I have control of that situation, to just not put him. Now, obviously, there's a lot around that, right? There's his well-being, there's his education, there's his social side. But, we've, as a family, and with him included, have talked about, these are your options, and what do you... Now, he misses his friends, he does, but he's also a very happy, solitary child. He's been around, an extended family of 4 relatively well-educated, nice adults that have kind of shaped his education and what he wants to learn. So for us, it's it's the most practical short-term solution, I think. But there was a part of that, there was a lot of, especially when, some of my family are teachers, and you say, yeah, we're not doing this. Okay. And friends and things. And I just have to know that for our family, it's the right thing. So again, it kind of goes, one of the sentences I like to use, if it's someone who is really dear to you, who's kind of questioning you, is, I love you, but screw you. Like it just doesn't, it doesn't impact. But I think the hardest thing that I got my head around with the home educating, as I meant to say, as opposed to homeschooling, but I thought I had to follow a curriculum. So I'm like, right, let's get, key stage 2, let's get it all in and do. And then it's only through, we've had great support from the school, great support actually from the council and the home education services. But it's, as long as you're covering some core things, like maths and it's really exploratory. It is pursue what he's interested in, and what he's interested in, thankfully, he is really interested in maths. He's very quick mental arithmetic, but he's also interested in coding, and we build some little, coding games. He's really into his music. So there's a drum kit on the hallway. He's practicing for his grade 1 in drumming at the moment. We can bake that into his school work, and it's just even video, and this is a bit controversial, but even video games. So I have baked in video games into his schoolwork, because I think, we've been playing a lot of Zelda, and a lot of that is, we don't know the answer. Let's go to YouTube. Let's go to Google. Let's find it. Let's apply it. And it is that kind of problem solving. So yeah, it's been really, really tough. I don't think it's going to be long term. But it meets our needs for now, and I just have to accept that external judgment. It is what it is.
And even you mentioned the computer games. Obviously, you're clearly a man who's not afraid of judgment, because you also put all this stuff out on the internet through all your various channels, through your podcast, TikTok, Instagram, the lot. You stick it all out there, and inevitably, presumably, some people say, "What are you doing?" Playing computer games at all, never mind playing computer games with your children or whatever, you're going to get a lot of that. But I'm more interested in the positive around that. What works in terms of the stuff, under the Career Dad banner, as you say, you're across various platforms. I know recently you went viral because you fed your daughter a shoe or something.
That's exactly. I feel like I know.
So let me just clarify for social services there.
No, all right. I'm joking. He didn't feed his daughter a shoe, but a video involving your daughter and shoes bizarrely went viral. What works? What are the ones that either go viral, the ones that get the best engagement?
Yeah, and do you know what? It can really depend on the platform. So you're right. So my 2 favorite platforms are LinkedIn and TikTok. Now, you could not have further, polar opposites in terms of the audience that they cater for. But yeah, it really depends. On TikTok, if people are unfamiliar with TikTok, it's more of that 15 to 60 second short video snippets. What works really well is educational or humor type videos. So I tend to show more of my life through Career Dads. So it's just things that parents will relate to. So that video you talked about is basically me saying, I know if my daughter sees her shoes, she will pick them up, bring them to me and go, until the shoes are on, and then walk over to the door and go, until you open the door. And then lo and behold, the next day she does exactly that. And I just happen to film it. And yes, I think it's like 2-point-something million views at the moment. And actually some news channels have picked it up, and I'm working with them at the moment, which is pretty cool. So on TikTok, it is kind of it's really Xanthi more than me. So my daughter, she's getting a lot of attention. On LinkedIn, it's really just being an open parent, I think. And you kind of alluded to it there in your kind of intro of this section, right? You sort of saying that not only am I doing this stuff, but I'm putting it out there into the world to almost be judged. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I am very comfortable internally and as a pair with my wife, of the decisions and choices that we're making. But that hasn't always been the case. And so I just think if I can put something out there that someone is struggling with, if there is a dad or a mum who is able to get an hour's peace and quiet because they're letting their 3-year-old play on apps on their phone, that's okay. Like, that's okay. Or at least I think it's okay. And so I'm saying I'm doing it, and, you know, we're all right. So it's just to try and show it's all right.
I feel like we've learned a lot already this week. There's been lots of lessons in here. I feel like a bit awkward moving on to tips, because it feels like we've had lots of good advice there. Where should we go first with tips? Well, go on then, Dan. Have you got any particular tip that you'd like to add to our ever-growing list of advice for lockdown dads?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is, you know, not to plug an article, the most recent article, but I did write an article around, you know, why it's important to be selfish. And I think it kind of ladders back to that guilt of, you know, working from home. We already talked about it's really hard to switch off between work and home. And if, you know, you're at home, if your kids are at home, and you think, oh, I've got a break in the day, I want to go for a run, or I want to, you know, do something, but that means that I'm not helping out my partner, or I'm not, and that was definitely me. And then I just decided to try and be a bit more selfish, because we always put out, well, I say we always, dads usually put themselves at the bottom of the totem pole. And actually, when you take that time, so yesterday I went for a run where I could have easily not and done something else. But then when I come back from that run and I had a shower and I finished off the bit of work I had to do, I've got tons of energy. And when my son's going, can we do this bit on Zelda for genuinely the 100th time? I'm like, yeah, let's do it, as opposed to being on my phone and fobbing him off. So I think that it really, again, good piece of advice from me is just make that time to be selfish, I think. And yeah, just the what we touched on before around, you know, if it works for you. A very quick story around this. I had a dad who'd just had a baby boy. He'd just been promoted to a director level, so very, very senior job. And he said to me, Dan, can we have a chat, because I'm really worried about my work-life balance. I'm like, okay, cool. So we sit down, we chat for 20 minutes, and I go, are you worried about your work-life balance? Because that's not what I'm getting. And he said, well, actually, no, I'm kind of happy. And I go, okay, so is it your wife? Is she telling you? No. She runs her own business. Like, we're kind of good. I go, right. So where's this coming from? Oh, well, we had dinner with my wife's brother, and it was, I'm like, right. So sorry, your wife's brother says that you don't have that you guys are happy. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, we don't really need to have this conversation. So again, if it works for you, screw everyone else.
I think that's really important about the guilt bit being, is it actually guilt, or is it sometimes the communication between couples makes it seem everything's much more manageable, and actually things you might be guilty about, once you have a conversation about them, not quite so, as the people who actually matter, as opposed to
exactly
your brother-in-law, who does matter but not quite as much.
Yeah.
And then things that it puts it into a better. I think it puts improves the context, and it puts it into a better position, I think. What about you, James? What's your tip this week?
All right, this might be unpopular. I got a feeling I might be in a sort of Game of Thrones type conversation here, but I've never watched Game of Thrones. It's all dragons and weirdos, right? It used to drive me nuts, because everybody in Parliament was always going on about Game of Thrones, and it's like nobody actually watches it. It's on some freaky channel that nobody gets, until it became massive. Anyway, but my tip is winter is coming. I think that's a Game of Thrones thing, right? That's not Lord of the Rings. I don't know.
It's Game of Thrones, yeah.
But it's more to do with the weather. Winter is actually coming. It's going to get darker. It's getting colder. We've been quite lucky that lockdown was in the spring and the summer and all the rest of it. I think it's worth taking a moment to think about what's coming down the track in the next few months and how you're going to deal with it. I think that speaks to Dan's issue about being selfish and doing stuff that maintains your mental health, that keeps you happy and all the rest of it. I think it's worth taking a moment now to think, right, okay, we've got 3 months through till Christmas. It's going to be dark. It's going to be cold. It's going to be different, and just pondering how you're going to cope with that, or whatever you need to do to get through that. What's your tip, Ian?
Well, my tip is about another podcast show that has lots of really good guests on, and it's Dan's podcast show. And which has about 50 odd episodes in, and we've had people who have been on this show and also on Dan's show, including obviously Dan. But yeah, I would look at the Career Dad podcast because it's such an eclectic and amazing mix of largely men. Is it all men? I think possibly
it's
all
largely men. 90+%.
Yeah. But from across the world with all kinds of amazing backgrounds. So the man who created Make-A-Wish is your latest podcast guest. So I would look up Career Dad podcast. Dan, what's your website where everyone can go and see your stuff?
Absolutely. So careerdad.co.uk. Everything's there.
Perfect. Excellent. Dan, it's been a pleasure having you on. I think we could chat for an hour or more quite easily. So thank you very much for listening and watching to episode number 19 of Lockdown Dads. We'll be back next week. Dan, thank you very much for being here and joining James and I for talking about your path to being Career Dan or Dad.
Amazing.
Whichever way you want to do it.
Thank you for having me.